Well, yes, to repeat or what Caroline just said, thank you everybody for coming in tonight. Thank you for coming in to share with us your fascination with watches and fascination with Grand Seiko. I'm Jack Forster. This is Joe Kirk. Those are two names that sound like they come from a detective novel, so excited about that. I've known Joe for many, many years, and he is I'm going to embarrass him a little bit, but he is the single greatest living expert on the history of Seiko and Grand Seiko and Credor that there is, I think, in the entire world.
That speaks English, maybe.
Yes, yeah, that's well, I don't know, actually. I mean,
I've got some good competition.
So there's a tremendous amount to talk about. Obviously, the history of Grand Seiko, which is what we're here for tonight, essentially, goes all the way back to 1960 when the first Grand Seiko was launched. But if we are going to talk about beginnings, Joe, I think I would be kind of curious to know, and I don't actually know this, but when did you first encounter Grand Seiko, and when was the first time you actually went to Japan and saw how these things are made?
Oh, that's a great question. I started in the watch industry 20 years ago this year, so a very exciting milestone. And my first foray into watches was just kind of like I was reading. I started in cigars actually, and read a European cigar journal that had an article on Franck Muller and how he became the master of complications. And that was when a light bulb went off over my head that not all watches worked on batteries. And so then shortly after, I started working at a cigar shop that also sold watches, and I became very quickly a kind of Swiss and German watch snob. And then after about a year of doing that, my boss came back from Baselworld and said, "I found the greatest thing in the world, Joe." And I said, "What?" And he said, "Seiko." And I said, "Are you nuts? Like what's going on here?" And these Seikos at the time, were quite expensive, and it was the introduction of a new technology called spring drive. And it was $3,000 to $6,000. The way they market it in the US was quite different than how they did it in Japan. In Japan, they put it right into Grand Seiko, but no one in the US knew what Grand Seiko was, so they marketed it as a totally different brand just called Seiko Spring Drive. And the store I worked at became successful. Maybe not all stores that carried it understood what they had, but that was my introduction to Seiko. My introduction to Grand Seiko, probably minutes later. And the internet was a bit more primitive back then. I was researching a lot on WatchUseek and time zone and things of that nature.
What year was this, Joe? Just for context.
So probably 2005, 2006, in that time frame was when I really started with it. So I was quite active on the forums back in the day, and I discovered that Grand Seiko was made to, kind of different than anything else Seiko had ever done before. Grand Seiko was made to be a simple, practical watch that was easy to wear. You could wear it every day and never have to worry about it. Like, that was the goal, is to just give you a one watch for your life, right? And it's always ready. It's always accurate, legible, and durable. And I said, it makes sense. Like, a watch is supposed to serve this purpose. Why aren't all people making watches that way? And I feel kind of ignorant now, because when a watch, from another brand or something like that maybe I admire greatly, I might look at it now and be like, but this aspect isn't so practical. Like, it's a little hard to read or something like that. And I feel like Grand Seiko has made me kind of judgy. But everyone has their areas of expertise, and this is Grand Seiko's path, right? So, a great everyday watch. So I worked in retail for 11 years, and then I spent about a year doing media, and then I had an offer that I couldn't refuse. Clearly, that is where I am today, and only about a month and a half into working for the company, they sent me out to Japan. And my mind was blown even more after the years of research I've been doing, trying to figure out things on my own, getting some help from the team from Seiko and Grand Seiko along the way. That was really an incredible experience, and I became so obsessed with the manufacturers, because we have two studios that make all Grand Seiko watches, and they're not enemies, but they're always in friendly competition, let's say. And so that's where the real rabbit hole
Mm-hmm.
kind of evolved, let's say.
Now, 2005, I think that was maybe a year, maybe a couple of years after I saw the first Grand Seiko watch that I ever saw. I was a moderator on the Purist.com, which was one of the first generation of discussion forums. Yeah. And so this is going back a few years, and Grand Seiko at that time was a very, very inside baseball. It was an insider's brand. Very few people had heard of it. You never saw them in the United States. If you had heard of them and you wanted one, you had to fly to Japan in order to pick one up. And there was a friend of ours who had graduated from watchmaking school, and we all got together and we asked him what brand he would like as a sort of a graduation gift from watchmaking school. And much to my surprise, he said Grand Seiko. So we picked out a Grand Seiko for him. Somebody actually had to bring it back from Japan. And when I saw it, I was, Grand Seiko has a reputation for making highly practical, highly pragmatic watches that are intended to be daily drivers. But this was and is, he still owns it. It was actually a physically beautiful watch in a way that I wasn't expecting.
That, I think, the element of design that Grand Seiko is striving for, obviously, the beauty aspect of it is based on the Japanese sense of aesthetic. And so, this concept of light and shadow and every gradation that comes in between is kind of the philosophy behind the brand's design style, let's say. And they established this design code for Grand Seiko back in 1967. So like the rules are the rules for Grand Seiko 2. It's a very hard set of rules, and it's almost impossible for them. It is impossible for them to break, almost impossible for them to bend. We're finally starting to see a little bit of bend in the rules of Grand Seiko, but the reality is that every surface needs to be finished absolutely perfectly flat, smooth, and distortion free, and that's all handcraft, right? The Zaratsu polishing. I think that's our favorite term, probably.
Yeah, I was actually surprised the first time I went to Japan and visited Grand Seiko was back in 2013, I want to say.
Oh yeah.
So I think it was one of the very first press trips that Grand Seiko had ever organized, and so we went to see how the watches were being made, and I was really blown away by the amount of manual work that went into the watches, hand polishing of the cases. There was a craftsman manually heat bluing the seconds hands for Grand Seiko watches. So those are all. If you see a blued seconds hand in a Grand Seiko watch, it's been manually heat blued. I saw somebody
the most torturous way possible. I must mention.
I saw a guy who looked like he must have been in his late 70s or early 80s. He looked like he'd been doing this all his life. He was diamond polishing hour and minute hands, and he was checking to see whether they were reflective in the correct way by shining light on them with a little plastic mirror, little pink plastic mirror that looked like it came from somebody's dress-up Barbie set. And there was something incredibly charming about that, about the amount of just pure manual labor, pure handwork that went into making the watches. And I think that's something that, although Grand Seiko has diversified its design vocabulary quite a lot, especially over the last 7 or 8 years. Yep. The amount of dedication that goes into making them is really astonishing, and it's if you ever get an opportunity to go and see how these watches are made, boy, it's an eye opener.
Yeah. We were actually just discussing. We have a possibility of touring our manufacturer in northern Japan. So we have 2 studios where we make Grand Seiko. One in Nagano Prefecture in central Japan. So if you take the regular train, about 3 hours from Tokyo, a little more west. And then the other, if you take the bullet train for about 3 hours in Iwate Prefecture, straight north. And so these 2 studios, like I said, slightly competitive, but each very independent from each other. So the dials, the hands, the cases, the movements, and the components utilized within the movements, all virtually made separately. So it's really hard to imagine that Grand Seiko is one brand. You'd think there's a lot of sharing going on between these 2 studios, and it's really not the case. So we were just talking about how there's 2 versions of white birch, and there are so many subtle details between the 2 that you would never guess that they're totally different watches. But it's not just the movements different. One's spring drive, one's high beat, but the dials themselves, the entire process, finish, totally different. The indices, the hands, even the dates, the chaptering, all small, subtle differences. And that's part of the beauty of the brand is you have this skill set in two very different locations. But I love how you mentioned the diamond cutting for the hour markers. When you look at our hour markers, right, they're very complex in shape. The whole goal is to make them sparkle like a diamond. So the more facets there are, the more perfectly polished they are, the more they reflect light. And it's a very simple formula. But you'll see, as we've been discussing, our design code is changing, evolving over the years. And in 2020, we introduced what we call the Evolution 9 design, which our latest introduction. The UFA is under that collection. The white birch is under that collection. So if you're familiar with those designs, this is kind of like the new era of Grand Seiko design. And those hour markers are insanely complex in terms of their shape and all individually diamond cut for every surface. And if you can imagine, the labor that goes into placing all these indices on a drum, diamond cutting each surface one by one, and then having to reposition and diamond cut each one by one, and then inspect them under a microscope using this little Barbie mirror that's, for lack of a better term, because basically what they're doing is they're just reflecting the light from the room off of the mirror and onto the indice, and they're looking for any flaws. And they do that for every single surface, for every single indice that they cut the surface for.
So that's the simplest hour marker has something, I counted them a while ago. There's I think 12 individual facets on each one. Each facet is individually mirror polished, and the transitions between each of the facets are absolutely razor sharp.
Yep.
All of this work done by hand, all the polishing done by hand. It's really astonishing. I mean, watches always, they live in the details anyway, but the level of detail that you find on those dials is astonishing.
I love the mention of the blued hand, though, because I said it was like kind of torturous, right? It's basically a gentleman standing at a stovetop, and it's very hot, stovetop. They have these little copper trays. They put the steel second hand on the copper tray. They put it down. They start prepping the next one, and they watch, literally just stare at this steel second hand as it changes color from silver to starting to like brown, purple, and then this cobalt shade of blue. And as soon as it hits that perfect color, they remove it from the heat, and the copper cools it down quickly, and that color is there forever. And that's, I think, one of the more impressive parts is one by one.
The window, the temperature window for getting the exact correct colors is pretty narrow as well. I think there's about a 30-degree range. So I want to say 530 to 560 degrees.
Which is a matter of seconds difference,
to get the color
like a tolerance. If you are off by a second, you will discolor the second hand.
So that part of Grand Seiko that is easiest to see is the beauty and attention to detail that goes into the cases, the dials, the hands, into the movement finishing. But Grand Seiko has also historically been very much about precision. And
Yes.
if you start in 1960 and then you go through to 1970 and then the early 1970s, you see the pursuit of higher and higher standards in mechanical precision until you get to the VFA, the very fine adjusted Grand Seikos, which I think began production in 1970, I think?
69.
69.
Yep. So yeah, the goal when Grand Seiko was introduced, obviously, it's still that same practical watch, right? Great everyday watch, accurate, legible, durable. Plain and simple. But, there were standards in the world in 1960 when Grand Seiko was introduced, and we wanted to make sure that our watch was just as good as any other watch on the market at the time. And back then, chronometer, was essentially established by the Bureau Official as plus 12 to negative 3 seconds in a day. Far better by today's standards, of course, but, back then, that was it. That was the international standard for a highly accurate watch. And so we started with chronometer. We made Japan's first watch to qualify within that chronometer specification. And then in a matter of 6 years, we decided that we were going to get out of the chronometer game, and we introduced what we call the Grand Seiko standard. And so from there, the Grand Seiko standard was plus 6 to negative 3 instead of the 12 to negative 3. And so 6 second difference per day. Dramatic difference in terms of accuracy. And then we started to pursue higher levels of accuracy. By 1969, as Jack had mentioned, we introduced the very fine adjusted, or the VFA, which was accurate within plus or minus a minute and a month. So we went from measuring, seconds per day to, the minute per month standard, or plus or minus 2 seconds a day back in 1969, which was near impossible, and certainly one of the most accurate watches you could wear on your wrist in the world at that time.
So a funny thing happened on the way to ultimate mechanical precision. Also happened in 1969.
Yes.
Which was the Q word.
Yes.
Quartz became the dominant technology in terms of portable precision timekeeping, and by 1975, I think, Seiko decided to get out of the Grand Seiko VFA business because the Quartz watches were simply keeping much better precision, and Grand Seiko sort of went dark.
Yeah, so Grand Seiko went dark around 1975 in that regard. They kind of supplemented because Quartz was so highly precise. They had kind of a supplementary that they called Grand Quartz, but it wasn't Grand Seiko. Like it couldn't be the same. So it kind of filled the shoes at the time and was kind of a kindred spirit maybe, but it certainly was not Grand Seiko. And it wasn't until 1988 that they reintroduced Grand Seiko as quartz movement for the first time, and it was a very slim quartz, the 95 GS caliber that was accurate within 10 seconds per year, and that was a big step in terms of achieving a high level of accuracy, but also still meeting all the standards that Grand Seiko required.
And then as time went by, a couple of things happened. The first was that mechanical Grand Seiko started being made again, and then spring drive.
Yes, indeed.
And the resumption of production of mechanical Grand Seiko watches happened roughly what year?
The whole mechanical kind of revolution for the company as a whole kind of began maybe a little bit more with Credor actually. And so I brought another brand here, and I'm sorry if it's going off topic of Grand Seiko a little bit, but we have another brand that's sold in Japan exclusively right now called Credor. And Credor is more focused on art, where Grand Seiko is more focused on practicality, but they are both very high-grade watches, and each in their own realm. Credor is pursuing more small size and ultra-thin. So in the early 90s, around 91, 92, we had the caliber 68, the ultra-thin Credor caliber that was starting to kind of come back into fruition. And it wasn't until 1998 that we reintroduced Grand Seiko caliber for the first time, known as 9S now, in 98. We introduced that caliber, and we did all the R&D in-house, and we actually used some of our own proprietary technology to develop the movement in a short time span of only about 3 years. So we really made a huge push during the 90s to revive mechanical watchmaking, but kind of two different approaches, and Grand Seiko was certainly a bit more challenging because of the requirement and accuracy standard.
I think one thing worth noting is the degree to which the term in-house is one I'm sure you're all familiar with, but the degree to which Grand Seiko watches are made in-house, the degree to which Grand Seiko is vertically integrated, is really there are few other watches in the industry that I can think of that have Grand Seiko's degree of vertical integration. The company actually grows its own quartz crystals for its quartz watches, and that gives them the ability to control the precision of their quartz watches to a very high degree. But everything's done in-house, including a lot of stuff that most other brands purchase from suppliers: mainsprings, balance springs, balances, escapement components, cases, dials, hands. The lubricants that are used in the watches are made by Seiko. So it's if in-house is meaningful, and I think that in this case it is.
Yeah.
It's Grand Seiko is about as good as it gets.
Yeah, it's and it all kind of stemmed from necessity. Being the company as a whole started as Kei Hattori and Company back in 1881, and the founder Kintaro Hattori. He really loved what they were doing in Europe and what they were doing in the U.S. in terms of watchmaking, but it was not practical to try and import parts or machines from either of those locations because the cost would have just been insanely high. So his path was to do it himself, and so out of that need, by 1910, they were mostly vertically integrated at that point. So even having the first automated pinion lathe in Japan, it was really remarkable how they can go from almost nothing to almost mass manufacture in such a short period of time. And so the reality of it is that necessity led to us, developing for our mechanical watches in-house. So you have springs, you have gears, you have all the components that are necessary being made in-house since the early 1900s for mechanical watches. And then 1969 hits. Quartz watchmaking is either a crisis or a revolution, depending on what side of the fence you're on. And the necessity to manufacture our own integrated circuits and grow our own quartz crystals in-house. It was absolutely essential in order for us to become a successful company. And without that, we could not bring things to life like Spring Drive today.
So Spring Drive is a great segue into talking about what to me was one of the biggest announcements that you guys made this year, which was the Spring Drive the UFA, the ultra-fine accuracy Spring Drive, which is the spiritual heir to the VFA watches from the 1970s.
Indeed. So yeah, UFA, Spring Drive is a unique animal, and it doesn't have a hairspring, so you don't have to very finely adjust the hairspring as you would in the mechanical watches from the late 60s and early 70s. So we have hit a new kind of measurement range in a self-winding wristwatch with UFA, to go from seconds per day, and then originally when Spring Drive hit in 2004 for Grand Seiko in the Japanese market, it was 15 seconds per month. So seconds today to seconds per month. Now we're hitting seconds per year in terms of accuracy, and we wanted to pay tribute to our past. When we made that first transition from measurement from daily to monthly. And so UFA is a nod to the past, but still completely something different and unique. And this ultra fine accuracy is 20 seconds per year, guaranteed plus or minus. And that's really remarkable for a watch that's self-winding, no battery, no need for like a capacitor, and all solely powered by a mainspring. So it's something else.
Yeah, that's a fascinating aspect of Spring Drive, which is a technology that's unique to Grand Seiko. I still, to this day, I have to remind myself that there's no battery inside a Spring Drive watch. There's a mainspring. There's a gear train, which is basically identical to a conventional watch gear train, right up until you get to the electromechanical regulating system. And if the mainspring runs down, the watch will stop running. And if you wind it up, it'll start up again. But it's not only is it a unique technology to Grand Seiko, it's one which no other company in the industry has been able to successfully duplicate. There was one attempt a few years back by one of the Swiss luxury brands to make something equivalent to Spring Drive, and I think they couldn't get it to work.
Yep. There were even patents back in the 70s that similar brands or similar ideas from other brands that just could never come to fruition.
Yeah, if you're interested in the technical side of Spring Drive, one of the fascinating things about it is to get it to work, you have to have an extremely efficient system in terms of power consumption at the integrated circuit, power consumption of the timing package, and power consumption of the regulating package. And one of the things that I was told the first time I went to Japan was that if every single person on the earth was wearing a Spring Drive watch, the amount of energy generated would be enough to light one 100-watt light bulb. Mm-hmm. So the energy produced is very, very low. It has to be because of the size of the system and because of the mechanical loads in the system. But the efficiency took, I think, something like 30 years to find
approximately. Yeah. So the idea came from this brilliant engineer that we had. So in central Japan, Nagano Prefecture again. That was actually the birthplace of Grand Seiko back in 1960, and then in 1969 it was also coincidentally the birthplace of the first commercially sold quartz wristwatch called Seiko Astron in 1969. So Christmas Day, 1969, and so they had this brilliant engineer there. His name is Yoshikazu Akahane. He had this idea to kind of have the perfect watch that attains the very high level of accuracy you get with quartz, but to be continuously powered through mechanical winding and driven solely by a mainspring. So it's essentially the everlasting watch, right? That is the pinnacle of accuracy. And so brilliant idea, He was way ahead of himself though, and his thought process was, instead of an escapement that's lock and unlock, right, stop and go motion, a lot of collision, a lot of friction, he based his concept on a bicycle rolling down a hill. Right, the wheel's spinning, you apply the brake, the brake is applied, it slows the speed, but you're not coming to a complete stop or a lock and go. So the problem is the physical contact is a lot of friction, which is terrible in watchmaking. So that would never work. But if we do it with magnetic resistance, essentially, an electromagnetic brake, then you can slow the speed without friction, without collision, and you can also essentially have a lubricant-free escapement. So some of the biggest hurdles in watchmaking were potentially going to be overcome. But he had this idea in 1977. His first prototype was 1982. It ran for about 3 hours. So obviously the energy efficiency, I don't know, we're all kind of fidgety with our watches. I mean, maybe every 3 hours we'd want to wind it.
Maybe not.
Maybe not. It took him 11 years to get it to a 10-hour power reserve. And this is all because it needs to consume power. So it basically needs to generate like a crank generator, right? It's using the mechanical energy to generate a small electrical current, and then in turn use that electrical current to become an electromagnetic brake and basically generate enough electricity to consume it all at the same time without the need for a battery or storage of that energy. And so, 93, he came out with his second prototype, 10-hour power reserve. By 99, they did it. They got it to a 48-hour power reserve. It was good enough for a commercial product for the first time. Unfortunately, the commercial product was 900 total watches, and they were only sold in Japan. And then we didn't see anything for 5 years. So,
yeah, and the constant forward gliding motion of the gear train is that's the signature of spring drive. You see this smoothly gliding seconds hand, and it's really the only watch technology in the industry that can actually say there's no increments in the movement of the hands. It's all smooth forward movement.
Yep. Yeah, you can slow it down as much as you want in slow motion, and you'll never see it skip, stutter, won't miss a beat. It's always pushing forward, and that was kind of one of the goals as well. Is this unique expression of time that's more true to how we perceive time.
Perceive it.
Yeah. It's like the progression only moving forward, right? You can't go backwards in time. Unless you're Marty McFly.
Now, when people get interested in Grand Seiko, do they often start with spring drive because it's
Yes.
kind of a unique technology?
Yes, spring drive is typically the starting point for most of our customers. At the same time, it is also our best-selling movement type out of our collections. But mechanical is certainly next most, and then quartz would be the least. But it's odd too, because in Japan it's very split, right? It's like everything sells evenly. So they find I think in the Japanese market, quartz is very practical, right? It's which is great for Grand Seiko. It's ready to go. It's got a 3-year duration with the battery as opposed to 3-day, and it's always accurate within at least 10 seconds a year, if not better. And then you can set your other watches to it. You just grab it out of the drawer, and it's always ready.
So there's some amazing watches from Credor here tonight, but there's an amazing watch that is a official Grand Seiko watch, and it is. And correct me if I'm mistaken, but I think it's by far the most complicated watch that Grand Seiko has ever made, which is the Kodo Constant Force Tourbillon.
Yeah.
And it's extremely unusual to actually be able to see one in person. I think this is the third time for me, and there's a lot of interesting stuff going on technically in that
Yes.
watch, and a lot of stuff that was not only new for Grand Seiko but new for watchmaking. Period.
Indeed. Yeah. We had this again, another story about a person, and I think that's one of the things I love the most about this brand is that there's so many unique people within the brand that really make it what it is. And even though it's obviously you can perceive us as a big company, but we're a smaller scale brand, right? And that's the reality of the situation. And the people behind it are the driving force. And even though their time may come where they retire, they're handing down that knowledge to the next generation. And so this constant force tourbillon, which is our first complication watch, the gentleman who came up with the idea is he's got a unique story, let's say. So his name is Takuma Kawachiya. Kawachiya is a brilliant mind. He went to school for engineering, but he's also a musician. And he played electric guitar in a rock band and in an orchestra, toured the world multiple times. And he has this amazing background in music. Eventually, he decided that I'm not going to make any money in music. So, ironically, he's like, I'm going to go to watchmaking school.
Another great place to get rich.
Yeah. So, I guess in his eyes that was the opportunity, and he's actually WOSTEP graduated, so Swiss certified in Japan. And it's very unusual for someone in our company to be WOSTEP certified. So after he graduated, he applied to our company. Obviously, they saw something very special in him, and this was kind of his first project that he pitched to our company at it's like an annual event. It's almost like a fair. You get on stage, you present your idea, and him and his newfound partner in crime, they actually went to the same school. I found out later. Yu Ishihara, who's the kind of aesthetic designer, but he's also a watchmaker and engineer, and these guys are just brilliant together. And they came up with this idea to have a ultimately precise tourbillon. Those typically don't go hand in hand, just for reference. So what they wanted to do was integrate a constant force mechanism into a tourbillon, because there's merit in those two mechanisms to achieve high accuracy. In a tourbillon, it's always it's revolving every 60 seconds. So this 360 rotation is going to help counteract gravity across varying positions, and it has merit for it. The problem is that once you assemble a tourbillon and you test it for accuracy, right? That's why there's not many chronometer certified tourbillons as an example. Typically, if it doesn't meet the test, you have to take it apart and start over again and adjust it, and it's a pain. So most people don't care so much about the accuracy of a tourbillon. It's more the art of putting a lot of very small pieces together in a very small condensed area, and it requires an insane amount of skill to do so. And then the constant force mechanism is, as you wind the mainspring to full, it's full power. That means that the balance wheel is getting full power and can swing to its full degree of amplitude, or it's as far as it possibly can without going too far, and keep good time, right? But as that power reserve dwindles, so does the power to the balance wheel, and so does the accuracy. So by incorporating a constant force mechanism, it's basically releasing spring tension once per second, so it's always even, and delivering it to the balance wheel so that every second it's got the same amount of power as it did in the previous second. And so the challenge is that you have, similar to the tourbillon itself, all these parts in this little tiny aperture at 6 o'clock. And how do you make it work and work efficiently? So what they wanted to do was integrate the constant force mechanism into the tourbillon, right? No intermediary parts, eliminate any power loss that could happen in between. At the same time, they're operating around the same axis. So what's happening is the tourbillon starts to spin, right? It goes 360 in 1 minute. Every 6 degrees, it winds up the spring, and that spring tension releases and delivers energy to the balance wheel every 6 degrees that the tourbillon moves. So that's every second. It's winding up a little spring as it moves, and it releases the energy into the balance wheel so that it keeps the amplitude high and the accuracy high. And so no one has done this before. So it's the world's first constant force tourbillon that operates integrated around the same axis.
This to me is fascinating because I think the single aspect of watchmaking that I'm the most interested in personally is the history of precision timekeeping. So you have in one watch the two classic solutions to two of the most fundamental problems in precision timekeeping. The tourbillon addresses the problem of variation in rate in positions due to the effects of gravity, and the constant force mechanism addresses the problem of isochronism. So ideally, in a perfect watch, it wouldn't matter how much energy was getting to the balance, because the amount of time it takes for the balance to make one oscillation would always be the same no matter what the amplitude of the balance was. But no watch is perfect. No mechanism is perfect, and in order to ensure that the balance amplitude remains consistent throughout the entire power reserve of the watch, these constant force devices, which are technically called remonteurs, were invented. In French, yes. First one was invented in the late 1500s by a Swiss guy named Jost Burgi, who also invented logarithms. Wrote the first table of logarithms. So clever guy. And this is, as Joe says, this is the first time that anyone has successfully placed a remonteur, a constant force mechanism, inside the tourbillon carriage and on the same axis. And you can take a look at the watch in just a little bit. You can actually see the action of the remonteur spring. So the remonteur spring winds once every second, and you can see the tourbillon cage advancing click, 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 click in 1 second increments.
Yeah, it's like you see the three arms of the tourbillon carriage are sweeping, as you would see in a conventional second hand in a mechanical watch. And then, every second, there's this kind of stiff jump of the constant force carriage chasing after it. And Mr. Kawachia assured us that it will never catch the tourbillon carriage. So, it's going to operate just fine.
So we've covered a lot of ground.
Indeed.
And I think that we'd love to open up the floor to any questions. If there's anything that you guys would like to ask, we've got a bunch of beautiful watches for you to look at.
Good question. King Seiko is a brand that came out in Japan in 1961 that the emphasis of Grand Seiko is the highest level of accuracy, legibility, durability. King Seiko, while trying to make an accurate and high quality watch, was a little bit more focused on size and style. So the manufacturer that was our factory basically name that was making King Seiko in 1961 was called Daini Seikosha back then, which is essentially equivalent to what our Grand Seiko studio Shizukuishi would be now. It's kind of a long, complicated storyline to get there, but
one of the most complicated things about Grand Seiko is actually understanding the management structure of the company.
Yeah, the business structure is quite complicated sometimes. But so back then there was Daini Seikosha and Suwa Seikosha, which was in Nagano Prefecture, which did the first Grand Seiko in 1960. And so we had these two different brands that were competitive in a sense. I mean, a lot of people see it as competing brands, but really it was more focused on lower price point and smaller size. And so it wasn't until 1967 that Daini Seikosha started to make some Grand Seiko, and Suwa Seikosha started to make King Seiko as well. So they basically delegated different responsibilities to each, and they had a little bit more cohesive. But King Seiko was always kind of like the tier below, let's say, Grand Seiko. Because really the only thing that I would say is on the same par as Grand Seiko in terms of quality is Credor, which was introduced in 1974. When you think of Seiko as a company, right, think of it as a group, similar to like Swatch Group or Richemont Group, right? There's the parent company, which in our case is named Seiko, but similarly, Swatch has Swatch Watch, they have Omega, they have Breguet, they have tons of different brands. So our overarching group is the Seiko Group Corporation, which is responsible for Seiko Watch Corporation. And within that, you have the Seiko Watch division, which makes King Seiko, but also Seiko 5 Sports, Prospex, and things of that nature. And then you have separate division, Grand Seiko, and then you have even a little bit more isolated because it's only for the Japanese domestic market, Credor. So those are kind of the primary brands under the Seiko group as a whole. We do a lot of manufacturing also, so we also have divisions that are responsible for sales of OEM type parts and things like that. So we're also providing components to others in the industry.
Shall we look at some watches? All right.
Great.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.